The ache was a familiar tenant in Clara's chest, a resident so long-standing it had stopped paying rent and simply existed, a dull, thrumming weight just beneath her ribs. It had a name, and its name was Maya. 2 years, 4 months, and 17 days. That was how long Clara had been cataloging this particular brand of exquisite agony, this silent, unrequited love for her best friend, her roommate, the literal sun around which her own quiet planet seemed to orbit. Tonight, the ache was particularly insistent, a low hum that vibrated with every word Maya spoke. They were curled on opposite ends of their worn, gray sofa, a battlefield of plush pillows and a shared chenille throw blanket between them. The living room was bathed in the soft, golden glow of a single floor lamp, casting long shadows that danced on the walls like secrets. Outside, a gentle rain whispered against the windowpanes, a soothing soundtrack to Clara's internal turmoil. Maya was talking about Liam again. Of course she was. He just doesn't get it, you know? Maya sighed, her voice laced with a frustration that had become its own recurring character in their late-night conversations. She pushed a strand of dark, wavy hair from her forehead, her brow furrowed. I try to explain how I'm feeling, and it's like I'm speaking another language. He just nods and says, "That sucks, babe," and then wants to talk about his fantasy football league. Clara nodded, a carefully constructed mask of sympathetic friendship firmly in place. She murmured the appropriate responses, the ones she had perfected over countless similar conversations. That sounds really frustrating. You deserve to be heard. Communication is so important. Each word was a betrayal of the screaming monologue in her own head, a chorus of "leave him. Please, just leave him. See me." The knife turned. It always did when Maya spoke of Liam. It was not a violent, stabbing pain, but a slow, methodical twist, a reminder of the chasm that lay between them. The chasm was shaped exactly like a 6-foot-tall, generically handsome man who thought a romantic evening was ordering pizza and letting Maya pick the movie. Clara had met him several times. He was not a bad person. He was just wallpaper. He was beige. And Maya, with her vibrant laugh that could fill a room and the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes that shone like constellations, was a masterpiece of color and light. She deserved a gallery, not a damp basement wall. "It's like, I'm lonely," Maya confessed, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "But I'm lonely when I'm with him. Isn't that the worst kind of lonely?" The question hung in the quiet room, so vulnerable and raw that it snagged on the air. Clara's heart fractured a little more. She wanted to crawl across the sofa, wrap Maya in her arms, and tell her that she would never be lonely if she were with her. She wanted to press her lips to that furrowed brow and smooth away all the hurt. But she couldn't. She was the best friend. The supportive, stable, perpetually single Clara. That was her role, the one she had been cast in and had played with Oscar-worthy dedication for years. To break character now would be to burn the whole theater down. So instead, she just said, "It is. It really is." Maya looked at her then, her gaze so direct and searching that Clara felt her breath catch. In the dim light, Maya's eyes were deep pools of liquid warmth, and for a terrifying, hopeful second, Clara felt as if she were being truly seen. Not just as a sounding board or a comforting presence, but as something else. "What about you, Claire? You never talk about anyone. You never seem lonely." The irony was a bitter pill on her tongue. "I have you," Clara managed, the words tasting like both truth and a devastating lie. "I'm not lonely." Maya's expression softened into a smile that could have powered the entire city. It was a weapon, that smile, and Maya wielded it with an unconscious, devastating grace. She unfolded herself and shifted across the couch, closing the distance between them until her knee was pressed against Clara's thigh. The point of contact was a supernova of heat, radiating through Clara's jeans and searing a brand on her skin. She fought the urge to flinch away, to protect herself from the casual intimacy that meant the world to her and, she was sure, nothing to Maya. "You're the best, you know that?" Maya murmured, leaning her head on Clara's shoulder. The weight was both a comfort and a torment. Clara could smell the faint, sweet scent of Maya's shampoo, something with vanilla and sandalwood, a fragrance that she knew would haunt her pillows for days. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd be fine, Clara thought, her own head resting gently against Maya's. But I would cease to exist. She closed her eyes, allowing herself this small, stolen moment of closeness. She focused on the feeling of Maya's soft hair against her cheek, the warmth of her breath, the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her shoulders. This was the stasis she lived in, a perpetual state of being just close enough to feel the warmth of the sun, but never close enough to escape the freezing cold of the space between. It was a quiet, comfortable kind of hell, and for 2 years, for months, and 17 days, she had called it home. She had convinced herself it was enough. It had to be. Because the alternative, the risk of losing this, of losing Maya entirely, was a thought too catastrophic to even contemplate. It was a darkness she refused to look into. The catalyst arrived, as such things often do, on a Tuesday night, disguised as a bottle of cheap red wine and a shared carton of pad thai. The rain from the week before had returned with a vengeance, drumming against the glass in a furious rhythm that made the world outside feel distant and irrelevant. Their small apartment was an island, a fortress of warmth and light against the stormy dark. They had abandoned the pretense of the dining table and were cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of their evening. The wine had worked its magic, loosening the tightly coiled knots of the week and softening the edges of their conversation. They were laughing, the easy, unburdened laughter of people who knew the precise architecture of each other's souls. Maya had just finished recounting a disastrous meeting at her graphic design firm, complete with animated impressions of her passive-aggressive boss. Clara's cheeks ached from smiling. In these moments, the ache in her chest receded, replaced by a pure, uncomplicated joy that was almost painful in its intensity. God, I needed this, Maya said, topping off both of their glasses with a generous pour. She leaned back on her hands, her dark hair fanning out on the rug behind her. Her cheeks were flushed from the wine, and her eyes sparkled in the lamplight. She was, Clara thought with a familiar pang, breathtaking. Me too, Clara agreed, taking a sip of the wine. It was tart and cheap, but it tasted like comfort. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of the rain and their soft breathing. Maya's gaze was distant, fixed on the ceiling as if she were reading something written there. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Quieter. More thoughtful. You know what Liam said to me the other day? She began, not waiting for an answer. We were kissing. And it was fine. It was, a kiss. She made a face, a subtle wrinkling of her nose that spoke volumes. And afterwards, he said, that was nice, just nice. Like we just shared a biscuit. Clara's heart did a slow, painful somersault. She knew this territory. It was the preamble to another lament about their lack of passion, their missing spark. She braced herself for the usual script. But Maya didn't follow the script. She turned her head, her eyes finding Clara's with an unnerving intensity. Is that what it's supposed to be? Just nice? I see these couples in movies, and it's like fireworks. A whole symphony. With him, it's like elevator music. She paused, chewing on her lower lip. Have you ever had a kiss that felt like fireworks, Claire? The question struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. It was too direct, too intimate. The air crackled with a sudden, palpable tension. All of Clara's carefully constructed defenses went on high alert. 1,000 answers flashed through her mind, most of them lies. She could invent a passionate, long-lost lover. She could be dismissive and say movies weren't real life. But the wine had lowered her guard, and the honesty in Maya's eyes demanded something real in return. No, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I can't say I have. Maya held her gaze, her expression unreadable. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was curiosity. A deep, analytical curiosity that made Clara feel like a specimen under a microscope. Me neither, Maya confessed, her voice just as quiet. I wonder what we're doing wrong. Clara had no answer for that. The we Maya meant was her and Liam, or perhaps women in general. But the we Clara heard was her and Maya, and the thought sent a jolt of pure electricity through her veins. Then Maya sat up, a strange, mischievous glint in her eyes. It was a look Clara knew well. It was the look she got before suggesting they get spontaneous, terrible tattoos or book a last-minute flight to somewhere they couldn't afford. It was her what-if look. "I wonder what it's like," Maya said, her voice a low murmur. "Kissing a girl, I mean. If it's different." The world stopped. The rain, the clock on the wall, the frantic beating of Clara's own heart, it all just ceased. The space between them, once a comfortable gulf, was now a charged void, humming with unspoken possibilities. Clara's mouth went dry. She couldn't form a single word. This was a line she had never imagined crossing, a door she had always assumed was triple-bolted. Maya seemed to misinterpret her stunned silence as hesitation or judgment. A challenge flickered in her gaze. She leaned forward, the scent of wine and vanilla suddenly overwhelming. "I dare you," Maya whispered. It was not a suggestion. It was not a question. It was a gauntlet thrown down on the Persian rug between them. "I dare you." 3 simple words that had the power to detonate the entire foundation of Clara's world. Her mind raced, a chaotic whirlwind of terror and a wild, terrifying hope. To say no would be to admit something was there, to make this moment 1,000 times more awkward, to build a new wall between them. To say yes was to step off a cliff without knowing if there was water or rocks below. But the hope, that treacherous, beautiful hope, was stronger than the fear. It was a tiny, resilient weed that had been growing in the cracks of her heart for years, and it was finally reaching for the sun. She saw the slight tremor in Maya's hand as she rested it on the floor. She saw the way Maya's breath hitched, a mirror of her own. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a drunken, flippant dare. Maybe it was a question Maya didn't know how to ask. Clara took a breath, a shaky, inadequate little gasp of air. The world started spinning again, slowly, and a single, terrifying thought crystallized in her mind. Dare accepted. She didn't say the words. She didn't need to. She simply leaned forward, closing the last few inches of the infinite distance that had always separated them. The dare hung in the air, a shimmering, fragile thing, and as her lips met Maya's, she felt it shatter into a million pieces. The first touch was impossibly soft, a hesitant brush of lips that was more question than statement. It tasted of red wine and fear. Clara's mind was a blank slate, wiped clean of everything except the sensation of Maya's mouth against hers. It was happening. After 2 years, 4 months, and 17 days of dreaming, of imagining, of aching for this exact moment, it was finally, impossibly happening. She expected Maya to pull away immediately, to laugh it off as a joke, a dare fulfilled. She had prepared herself for the sting of that dismissal. It was the price of admission for this one, fleeting moment of bliss. Her hands were braced on the floor, ready to push back, to retreat into the safety of her designated role as the friend. But Maya didn't pull away. Instead, something shifted. A current, a change in the very atmosphere of the room. A soft sound escaped Maya's throat, a sigh or a gasp, and her lips softened against Clara's. Her hand, the one that had been resting on the floor, lifted and came to rest on Clara's jaw, her thumb stroking gently against her cheek. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, it sent a shockwave through Clara's entire system. This was not part of the dare. Dares were clinical, detached. This was something else. And then, Maya kissed back. It was not a joke. It was not a performance. It was a real, searching kiss. Her lips parted slightly, and she tilted her head, deepening the connection. It was hesitant at first, exploratory, but there was an undeniable current of response, of reciprocation, that made Clara's heart feel like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. The ache she had carried for so long was suddenly replaced by a feeling so vast and overwhelming she couldn't name it. It was a tidal wave of every suppressed hope, every silent wish, crashing down on her all at once. Clara's mind, which had been frozen in shock, finally rebooted. Her own hands, clumsy and trembling, found their way to Maya's waist, pulling her closer. The world narrowed to this single point of contact, this impossible, breathtaking reality. The kiss was no longer soft and hesitant. It was infused with a desperate, unspoken longing, a raw hunger that seemed to come from a place deeper than a simple dare. It was years of conversations, of shared secrets, of unspoken feelings, all culminating in this one searing moment. It could have lasted for 10 seconds or 10 minutes. Clara had no way of knowing. Time had become a fluid, meaningless concept. All that existed was the warmth of Maya's skin, the taste of her lips, the feeling of her hand tangled in the hair at the nape of Clara's neck. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. Maya pulled back, her breath coming in short, sharp pants. Her eyes were wide, her pupils dilated, the golden flecks swimming in a sea of dark, dazed confusion. Her lips were slightly swollen, and her cheeks were flushed a deep crimson. She looked stunned, utterly and completely stunned. Her hand was still on Clara's cheek, her thumb frozen mid-stroke. The silence that descended was heavier, more charged, than any silence they had ever shared. The rain against the window sounded like thunder. Maya breathed, the word a puff of air. She blinked as if waking from a dream. Weird, she finally dropped her hand, and the loss of contact was so abrupt it felt like a physical blow. She scrambled back, putting a few feet of distance between them. She ran a hand through her hair, refusing to meet Clara's eyes. "Well," she said, her voice strained, attempting a lightness that fell completely flat. "That's that then." "Dare's a dare," she let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded more like a choked sob. Clara couldn't speak. Her lips tingled, a ghostly echo of the kiss. The word weird was ricocheting around in her skull, a painful, bruising reminder of reality. It had been a dare. A drunken, stupid dare. The reciprocation, the tenderness, the way Maya had kissed her back, she must have imagined it. It was just her own desperate longing projecting itself onto the situation. I should probably go to bed," Maya mumbled, getting to her feet with a wobbly, uncoordinated grace. She still wouldn't look at Clara. "Early meeting tomorrow, Maya," Clara started, her own voice sounding foreign and shaky. She didn't know what she was going to say. "What was that? Did you feel it too? Please tell me I'm not crazy." But Maya was already halfway to her bedroom. "Night, Claire," she called over her shoulder, her voice tight. And then she was gone, her bedroom door clicking shut with a sound of devastating finality. Clara was left alone on the living room floor, surrounded by the remnants of their meal and the ghost of a kiss. The air was thick with unspoken things, with the electricity of what had just happened. She slowly raised her fingers to her lips, the skin still humming with the memory of Maya's touch. It hadn't felt weird. It had felt like coming home. It had felt like the most real, honest thing she had ever experienced. And Maya had called it weird. The familiar ache returned to her chest, but it was different now. It was sharper, more acute, laced with the fresh poison of confusion and a hope so painful it felt like despair. The dare was over. But for Clara, something had just irrevocably begun. The world had tilted on its axis, and she had no idea how to set it right again. The days that followed were a study in quiet tension. The easy, comfortable rhythm of their shared life was gone, replaced by a stilted, awkward choreography. They moved around each other like strangers, two celestial bodies knocked from their familiar orbits, now circling one another with cautious, uncertain gravity. Mornings were the worst. The kitchen, once a stage for their sleepy, coffee-fueled banter, became a silent, functional space. They would pour their coffee, toast their bread, and offer tight, polite smiles, their eyes never quite meeting. Clara felt like a ghost in her own home. Every surface held a memory of the kiss. The spot on the rug where it had happened seemed to glow with a residual energy. The chenille throw on the sofa seemed to mock her with its memory of all the times Maya had casually draped it over them both. She replayed the moment in her mind on an endless, torturous loop. The dare. The soft press of lips. The shocking, undeniable response. The way Maya's thumb had stroked her cheek. And then the aftermath, the confusion, the dismissal, the word weird. Had she imagined it all? Was it just wishful thinking, her own desperate heart coloring a meaningless moment with significance? But the memory felt too real, too visceral. The way Maya had deepened the kiss, the soft sound she had made, those were not the actions of someone simply going through the motions of a dare. They were the actions of someone who was feeling something. Weren't they? Maya, for her part, seemed to be locked in her own private struggle. She was quieter than Clara had ever known her to be. She spent more time in her room with the door closed. When she was in the common areas, she was perpetually distracted, scrolling on her phone with a ferocious intensity or staring out the window with a distant, troubled look in her eyes. She stopped talking about Liam altogether. His name, once a constant refrain in their apartment, simply vanished from her vocabulary. The silence where his name used to be was somehow louder than the complaints had ever been. About a week after the dare, the fragile truce of their avoidance shattered. Clara was in the kitchen, washing dishes from dinner, her mind a million miles away. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't hear Maya come in. "Claire." Clara jumped, dropping a soapy plate with a clatter into the sink. She spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Maya was standing in the doorway, wrapped in an oversized gray hoodie, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked small and uncertain. "Sorry," Maya said, her voice soft. "I didn't mean to scare you, it's fine," Clara replied, her voice coming out a little too high. She turned back to the sink, her hands submerged in the warm, soapy water, needing something to do, something to focus on. "I was just thinking." Maya didn't leave. She walked further into the kitchen and leaned against the counter opposite the sink, closing the distance between them. Clara could feel her presence, a warmth at her back that was both comforting and agonizing. "Can I ask you something?" Maya's voice was hesitant. Clara braced herself. This was it. The conversation she had been both dreading and praying for. "Of course, what does it feel like?" Maya asked, her words slow and careful. "When you really, truly love someone. Not just, care about them. But that all-consuming, can't eat, can't sleep kind of love. Is that a real thing, or is it just something they invented for movies?" Clara's hands stilled in the water. The question was a scalpel, expertly wielded, slicing straight to the heart of everything. She was asking about love, but she was really asking about the kiss. About the fireworks. About the elevator music. She was trying to understand the foreign country they had briefly visited together on the living room floor. Clara took a slow, deep breath, choosing her words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. She couldn't tell the whole truth, that it felt like the constant, humming ache in her own chest, but she couldn't lie either. "Not about this." "I think it's real," she said, her gaze fixed on the suds in the sink. "I think it feels like safety. Like no matter what happens in the world, there's this one person who is your home. And it's not just about the big moments. It's about the quiet ones. The way they drink their coffee or the sound of their laugh. It's knowing them better than you know yourself and still wanting to discover more every day." She risked a glance at Maya. "And when they touch you, it's not just touch. It's a conversation. It's electricity," the word hung in the air between them. Electricity. The very thing she had felt when Maya's hand had touched her face. Maya was staring at her, her hazel eyes wide and searching. She looked like someone who had been given a map to a place she never knew existed. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just watched Clara, her expression a mixture of awe and something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. "Oh," Maya finally whispered. The word was small, but it held a universe of meaning. It was a sound of dawning, of a light being switched on in a dark room. From that night on, the dynamic shifted again. The awkward avoidance was replaced by a new, tentative intimacy. It was a fragile, delicate thing, this new space they were navigating. They started talking again, really talking, not just about work or the weather, but about their hopes, their fears, their definitions of happiness. The conversations always happened late at night, on the sofa, the same sofa where the world had changed, as if they were unconsciously trying to reclaim the space, to redefine it. And the touching began again. But it was different now. It was no longer the thoughtless, casual intimacy of their old friendship. Every touch was deliberate, freighted with meaning. It started small. Maya's fingers would brush against Clara's when she passed her a mug of tea, and the contact would linger for a fraction of a second too long. Then, one evening, while they were watching a movie, Maya's knee pressed against Clara's, just as it had so many times before. But this time, when Clara instinctively started to pull away, Maya shifted, a subtle movement that kept them connected. They sat like that for the entire 2-hour film, a single, constant line of warmth from hip to knee, a silent, blazing statement in the dark. Clara's senses were heightened to an almost painful degree. She was aware of every shift in Maya's breathing, every small gesture. One night, while Maya was talking, gesturing with her hands as she always did when she was passionate about something, she unconsciously reached out and began tracing patterns on the back of Clara's hand. She drew invisible circles and lines on Clara's skin, her touch soft as a feather, and she didn't seem to realize she was doing it. But Clara realized. Every nerve ending in her body was screamingly aware. It took every ounce of her self-control to sit still, to not snatch her hand away, to just let it happen. The most telling moments were the ones she caught when Maya thought she wasn't looking. Clara would glance up from her book and find Maya watching her, a soft, contemplative expression on her face. And more than once, during their late-night talks, Clara saw it. Maya's gaze would drop from her eyes to her lips, just for a second, a fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker. But Clara saw it. And each time, it was like a silent confession, a question Maya was asking with her eyes that her lips were not yet brave enough to form. Clara was living in a state of suspended animation, caught between the agony of uncertainty and the dizzying heights of hope. Something was happening. A profound and fundamental shift was occurring in the foundation of their relationship. The ground beneath her feet was unstable, constantly moving, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might be moving toward something, instead of just standing still. The escalation was a slow, beautiful, terrifying dance, and Clara had no choice but to follow Maya's lead, praying she wouldn't be the one left standing alone when the music finally stopped. The point of no return came on a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks and 3 days after the dare. The day was gray and unremarkable, the sky a flat, washed-out canvas. Clara was curled up in the armchair by the window, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in over an hour. Her mind was too busy tracing the intricate new map of her relationship with Maya. The air in the apartment was still, thick with a tension that had been building for days, a gathering storm just off the coast. Maya had been gone for most of the day. She had left in the morning with a mumbled, "Going for a walk." "Need to clear my head." She hadn't said where she was going, but Clara had a sinking feeling it had something to do with Liam. The silence about him had stretched for so long it had become a tangible presence in their home, a ghost at their dinner table. When the front door finally opened, Clara's head snapped up. Maya stood in the entryway, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. She looked exhausted, as if she had walked 100 miles instead of just a few. She met Clara's eyes across the room, and in their depths, Clara saw a strange mix of devastation and an unnerving, profound relief. "I ended it," Maya said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She kicked off her shoes and walked slowly into the living room, collapsing onto the sofa. "I broke up with Liam." Clara's heart gave a powerful, complicated lurch. This was the moment she had fantasized about for years, the sentence she had longed to hear. But now that it was here, there was no triumphant joy, only a heavy, anxious anticipation. She closed her book, her carefully constructed neutrality her only shield. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Maya stared at the ceiling for a long moment before answering. "I don't know what I am," she said, her voice cracking. "I should be heartbroken, right? I should be a mess. I was with him for over a year. But I feel empty." And free. She finally turned her head, her gaze pinning Clara in place. "He asked me why. I tried to explain it. The loneliness. The feeling that something was missing. And you know what I realized while I was talking to him?" Clara shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. I realized that every single thing I told him was missing from our relationship is something I have with you. The words were a quiet detonation in the still room. The way you listen. The way you know what I'm thinking before I say it. The way I can be completely, 100% myself with you and never feel judged. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. I told him I felt like I was playing a part. With you, I've never had to act. Not for a single second, Clara felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. This was too much, too fast. Maya was hurt and confused, reeling from a breakup. She was latching onto their friendship, onto the stability Clara provided. It didn't mean what Clara's desperate heart wanted it to mean. It couldn't. That's what friends are for, Maya, Clara said, the words feeling like ash in her mouth. She was trying to offer an out, a safe explanation for Maya's feelings, as much for her own protection as for Maya's. No, Maya said, her voice suddenly firm. She sat up, her eyes blazing with a newfound clarity. No, it's more than that. Don't you see? I've been measuring him, measuring every relationship, against what I have with you. And they all came up short. They all felt like cheap imitations because I was comparing them to the most real, most authentic connection in my life. She stood up and began to pace the small space between the sofa and the armchair, her movements agitated, restless. And the kiss, Claire, she whispered, stopping in her tracks. God, the kiss, Clara's breath hitched. I called it weird, Maya continued, her back to Clara. I was so scared. It wasn't weird. It was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. It was the first time I felt anything, really felt anything, in so long. It terrified me. So I ran. I said it was weird and I ran away from it. She turned around slowly, her face a canvas of raw, vulnerable emotion. I've been thinking about it every single minute of every day since. I've been thinking about kissing you again. The confession hung between them, a fragile bridge over a terrifying canyon. This was it. The point of no return. The subtext had finally, explosively, become text. But Clara was frozen, paralyzed by years of self-preservation. Hope was a dangerous, wild animal, and she was terrified to let it out of its cage. What if she was wrong? What if this was just post-breakup confusion? If she reached for this and it crumbled to dust, she would not survive the fall. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She retreated. She pulled back into herself, her fear a thicker, stronger shield than her hope. The silence stretched, and with every passing second, the beautiful, terrifying confession on Maya's face began to curdle into uncertainty and hurt. Maya saw the shift. She saw the walls go up in Clara's eyes. Her expression faltered. Claire, she whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. Say something. Please, Clara couldn't. The words were trapped behind a dam of fear. The hurt in Maya's eyes sharpened into a new kind of resolve. She closed the distance between them, stopping directly in front of Clara's chair. She crouched down, forcing Clara to look at her. You've been hiding from me for weeks, Maya said, her voice low and insistent, refusing to let Clara look away. Ever since that night. You're here, but you're not. You're a million miles away. I want to know why. Her voice dropped even lower, becoming a raw, desperate plea. What aren't you telling me, Claire? The direct question was a battering ram against the fortress of Clara's silence. There was nowhere left to hide. The pacing was over, the charged glances were over, the tentative touches were over. All that was left was the truth, in all its terrifying, brilliant glory. It was either now or never. Leap or stay on the cliff edge forever. Clara looked into Maya's eyes she knew better than her own, and saw a maelstrom of fear, hope, and confusion that perfectly mirrored her own. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't lie. Not anymore. She owed Maya the truth. She owed herself the truth. She took a shuddering breath, the first of many. The confession was waiting. The dam inside Clara finally broke. The fear, the longing, the years of carefully guarded silence, all of it came rushing out in a torrent of words that tumbled over each other, clumsy and desperate and utterly, terrifyingly honest. Because I'm in love with you, she whispered, the words feeling both sacrilegious and holy on her tongue. The sound of them, spoken aloud in the quiet room, was shocking. They were real. They were tangible. They couldn't be taken back. "I'm in love with you, Maya. And I have been for so long I can't even remember what it felt like not to be." She watched the emotions flicker across Maya's face like a time-lapse of a storm. Shock. Confusion. And then, something else. Something Clara hadn't dared to hope for. Relief. A profound, soul-deep relief that seemed to soften every line on Maya's face, to ease the tension in her shoulders, to still the restless energy that had consumed her for weeks. 2 years, Clara continued, the confession now a flood. For months. And, whatever day it is today, that's how long I've been in love with you. Every time you talked about Liam, it was like a knife in my chest. Every time you touched me, even just brushing past me in the hall, it was like being struck by lightning. That kiss, it wasn't a dare for me, Maya. It was everything. And I thought I was the only one who felt it. When you said it was weird, you broke my heart. Her voice cracked on the last words, and she finally broke eye contact, staring down at her own hands, which were twisted into knots in her lap. She had done it. She had laid her heart, bruised and battered, at Maya's feet. She braced herself for the impact, for the pity, for the gentle but firm rejection that would surely follow. She waited for the sound of Maya standing up, of her walking away. Instead, she felt a warmth envelop her hands. Maya's fingers were intertwining with hers, her grip firm and sure. Clara looked up, her vision blurred with unshed tears. Maya was smiling. It wasn't her usual bright, dazzling smile. This was something different. It was soft and shaky and breathtakingly beautiful. Tears were shining in her own eyes, mirroring Clara's. "You're wrong," Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. "You weren't the only one who felt it. I felt it. God, Claire, I felt it so much it scared the hell out of me." She squeezed Clara's hands. I think I might be falling in love with you. Maybe I have been for a while, and I was just too blind or too scared to see what was right in front of me. You're my best friend. It wasn't supposed to be this, but it is. It's so completely, terrifyingly this." Clara's mind struggled to catch up with her heart, which was soaring into the stratosphere. She was hearing the words, but they felt like a dream, a beautiful hallucination conjured by her own desperate longing. "But you're with Liam." I was with Liam," Maya corrected gently. "And maybe the reason it never felt right with him, or with anyone else, is because they weren't you. I was trying to find what we have in other people, and it was never there. I didn't know what I was looking for, but it was you. It's always been you." The world seemed to shrink until it contained only the two of them, kneeling on the floor of their living room, their hands clasped together, their shared tears a testament to the monumental shift that was taking place. The years of pining, the ache, the confusion, it was all coalescing into this single, perfect, terrifying moment of mutual understanding. Maya's gaze dropped to Clara's lips, and this time, it didn't flicker away. It stayed. It was a clear, unmistakable question. A silent permission sought. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, joyful drumbeat. She gave the slightest of nods, a barely perceptible movement that conveyed a universe of consent. Maya leaned in slowly, giving Clara every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. She met her halfway. "Can I?" Maya whispered, her lips ghosting against Clara's, her breath warm and sweet. "Please," Clara breathed back. And then she kissed her. This was not the kiss from the dare. That had been a spark in the dark, chaotic, and uncertain. This was the sunrise. It was slow and intentional and filled with a reverence that made Clara's soul ache with the beauty of it. Maya's lips were soft and tentative at first, relearning a language they had only spoken once before. Her hand came up to cup Clara's cheek, her thumb stroking away a tear. Clara responded with everything she had, pouring 2 years, 4 months, and a lifetime of unspoken love into the kiss. Her hands moved from Maya's, one coming to rest on her waist, the other tangling in the soft hair at the nape of her neck, pulling her impossibly closer. The kiss deepened, the initial hesitation melting away into a certainty that was as profound and undeniable as gravity. It was a kiss of confession, of relief, of discovery. It was the taste of home. It was fireworks and a symphony and every other cliché that Clara had ever rolled her eyes at, and it was all real. It was a conversation without words, a perfect, eloquent expression of everything they had been too afraid to say. When they finally broke apart, it was only for lack of air. They rested their foreheads together, their breath mingling, their eyes closed. The silence that followed was not heavy or awkward. It was full. It was peaceful. It was the calm after a storm that had been raging for years. "Oh," Maya whispered, the word a soft puff of air against Clara's lips. It was the same word she had used in the kitchen, but this time it was not a sound of confusion. It was a sound of wonder, of arrival. "Wow," was all Clara could manage, her own voice husky and unrecognizable. Maya pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The confusion was gone, replaced by a look of such pure, unadulterated adoration that it took Clara's breath away. "So," Maya said, a slow, radiant smile spreading across her face. "That didn't feel weird at all." Clara laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like it came from the deepest part of her. "No," she agreed, her own smile feeling wide enough to split her face. "It really didn't." It felt like the only thing in the world that had ever made perfect, absolute sense. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, the late afternoon light fading to a soft, dusky purple outside the window. The world had been remade, and they were tentatively exploring its new geography. The initial euphoria of the kiss and confession had subsided into a quieter, more vulnerable reality. The air was still humming with the aftershock of it all, but now, the first threads of fear began to weave their way in. It was Maya who spoke first, her voice a murmur against Clara's shoulder where her head was resting. "I'm terrified." Clara's arm tightened around her. The honesty was a relief. "Me too," she confessed, her own voice barely a whisper. "I'm completely, utterly terrified." "What does this even mean?" Maya asked, shifting so she could look up at Clara. Her eyes were wide, searching for an anchor in this new, uncharted ocean. What do we do now?" The questions were huge, monumental. They involved Liam's memory, their friends, their families, the entire architecture of the lives they had built. Clara looked into Maya's worried face and felt a surge of protectiveness, of a fierce, unshakable certainty that cut through her own fear. "I have no idea," Clara answered honestly. "I don't have a map for this." But she paused, tucking a stray piece of hair behind Maya's ear, her fingers lingering on the soft skin there. "We figure it out. Together. That's what we do. We take it one day at a time. Today we're just this." Whatever this is, Maya seemed to drink in her words, a visible wave of relief washing over her. "One day at a time," she repeated, as if testing the weight of the phrase. "I can do that." She settled back against Clara, her body relaxing into the embrace. "It just feels so big. Like everything before this was black and white, and someone just flipped a switch to color." "I know," Clara murmured, pressing a soft kiss to the top of Maya's head. "I've been living in color for a while. It's nice to finally have some company." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the quiet processing of this new reality. Clara's mind drifted back over the past few weeks, the past few years, recontextualizing everything through the lens of this new truth. Every shared glance, every lingering touch, every late-night conversation was suddenly imbued with a new, deeper meaning. "You know," Maya said softly, breaking the silence, "when I was breaking up with Liam, he asked if there was someone else. And I said no. I actually believed it." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "How could I have been so blind? I was describing you to him. I was telling him all the ways he wasn't you." She pushed herself up on one elbow, her expression one of dawning, almost painful realization. "All those times I complained about him not really listening, it was because you always hang on my every word. All those times I felt like he didn't understand me, it was because you finish my sentences. I told you I was measuring him against you, but it was more than that. I was holding up a picture of our friendship and asking him why our romance didn't feel that good. I was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole because I was too afraid to admit that the hole was U-shaped. The validation in those words was a balm on the old, tender wounds of Clara's heart. To know that she hadn't been a ghost, that her presence had been so deeply felt, so fundamental to Maya's happiness, even unconsciously, it was a gift. It was the missing piece of the puzzle, the one that made everything click into place. I was always so jealous, Clara confessed, her turn to be vulnerable. Not just of Liam, but of all of them. I hated that they got the parts of you that I didn't. The dates, the hand-holding, the kisses, they never had me, Maya said, her voice fierce with conviction. Not really. They had a version of me. A placeholder. My heart was here the whole time, in this apartment, on this sofa. I just didn't know how to claim it. They looked at each other, the full weight of their shared history, their rewritten past, settling around them. It was daunting, but it was also beautiful. It was a story that had been writing itself in invisible ink for years, and now, finally, they could both read the words. They made a decision then, not with words, but with a shared look of understanding. They would try this. They would be brave. They would step off the cliff together, holding hands, trusting that they would learn to fly on the way down. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was now overshadowed by a hope so bright and powerful it felt like its own source of gravity, pulling them inexorably, wonderfully, together. 3 months later. The morning light streamed into the kitchen, painting stripes of gold across the familiar wooden floor. The air smelled of freshly ground coffee and something warm and sweet, like cinnamon. There was a new rhythm to their mornings, a slow, easy dance they had choreographed without words. It was a dance of comfortable silence, of shared glances over the rims of coffee mugs, of fingers brushing as they reached for the same carton of milk. Clara stood at the counter, watching as Maya, dressed in one of Clara's old, worn t-shirts and a pair of sleep shorts, carefully poured hot water over the coffee grounds. Her movements were focused, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration, the same way it was when she was sketching a new design. Clara's heart swelled with a love so potent, so calm and steady, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The frantic, aching desperation of her old love had been replaced by this deep, quiet certainty. It was the feeling of home she had once tried to describe, and she lived in it every single day. The awkwardness of those first few weeks was a distant memory. They had navigated it all, telling their friends, who had responded with a resounding and knowing finally, and the quiet, final removal of Liam's forgotten hoodie from the back of the coat closet. They had fallen into a new normal that felt more natural than the old one ever had. They were still Clara and Maya, best friends who laughed at the same stupid jokes and knew each other's takeout orders by heart. But now they were also Clara and Maya who fell asleep holding hands and stole kisses over the kitchen counter and looked at each other with a softness that was reserved for them alone. Maya finished with the coffee and turned, a triumphant smile on her face. Perfection, she announced, holding up the steaming carafe. Her eyes met Clara's and her smile softened into something more intimate. Morning, morning, Clara replied, her voice warm. She leaned in, and Maya met her halfway for a slow, sweet kiss that tasted of coffee and sleep. It was effortless. It was theirs. I was thinking, Maya said, pouring the coffee into their favorite mugs, one a cheerful yellow, the other a calming blue. We should do something crazy this weekend. A dare? Clara raised an eyebrow, a playful smile touching her lips. A dare? Are you sure you can be trusted with dares? Maya laughed, a full, rich sound that filled the sunny kitchen. She handed Clara the blue mug, their fingers tangling for a moment. Okay, fair point. But this is a good one. Let's drive to the coast. No plan, no reservations. Just get in the car and go. See where we end up. The idea was impulsive, chaotic, and utterly perfect. It was so quintessentially Maya, but now it was for her. For them. I dare you to pack a bag in under 10 minutes, Clara challenged, her eyes sparkling. You're on, Maya said, her own eyes alight with excitement. Later that night, long after the coffee and the dare and the start of their day, they were curled up in bed, the city lights a distant glitter outside their window. The easy silence of companionship enveloped them. Clara was tracing patterns on Maya's back, just as Maya had once done on her hand, a silent, loving conversation in the dark. "I'm so glad I dared you," Maya whispered into the quiet, her voice soft with sleep. Clara smiled against her hair, pressing a kiss to her temple. The memory of that night, once a source of such turmoil, was now a cornerstone of their story, the moment the world had tilted them together instead of apart. She thought of the fear, the risk, the terrifying leap into the unknown. She thought of the years of silent waiting and the beautiful, unexpected reward. "I'm so glad you kissed back," she whispered in return. She understood then that sometimes the most frightening dares led to the most beautiful discoveries. Love wasn't always a straight line. Sometimes it was a winding, unexpected path you found only when you were brave enough to step off the one you thought you were supposed to be on. And as she held Maya in her arms, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of her heart against her own, Clara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was finally, completely, exactly where she needed to be.